Living my bucolic life, free healthy city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hello, welcome back. I'm excited about this project because it's a requested project from my website or from my Facebook group a little bit back. And I've been trying to figure out how to make this so that it works for me, because this is it. It's going to be a little dress. It's going to be this dress here. Okay, that's the pattern. I'm making it with the A-line type skirt and the shorter sleeves. You know, I think that's going to be lovely. But it looks like an extremely serious dress. You know, this is a business or a, you know, something down to earth, very serious type of a goings-on type of here. And unfortunately, I don't have a down-to-earth, very serious type of life events. So what I finally come up with is I'm making this dress, but I'm making it out of a happy fabric, you know, because of me. And the materials that it calls for are wovens, lightweight wovens. And it lists linen, crepe, gabardine, wool, lightweight tweed. So all different varieties of lightweight wovens. Flannel is a lightweight woven too. It's not listed, but that's what I'm going to use. And I am going to use this delightfully lighthearted springtime, it looks like a watercolor painting of plaid on the fabric. Why not? You know, why not? So I'm excited about this. The bodice is double-breasted. It is somewhat fitted. It has a collar, but it looks like it's a one-piece collar, not a, you know, collar and a stand. So I think that it's actually going to work pretty well. We do have princess seams, you know, so we have all of the fun that's involved with those. So I am going to go ahead. I have pre-washed my fabric with hot water, pre-dried it in an extremely hot dryer. So hopefully all of the shrink or most of the shrink is out of it now. So I'm not in any danger with using it for my main fabric. So let me go ahead, figure out what pattern pieces I need to cut out of the tissue paper, and I will be right back. So one thing, I just opened it and just noticed that this is one of these pick your cup size patterns, which is nice, being that it's a princess seam. It's very nice. So it's going to give you the option of filling out their little cheat sheet of making the two measurements, figuring out the difference and figuring out what cup size that corresponds to. And there should be different pattern pieces based on the result that you come up with. In my past experience for me, and this is just me, everybody's different, but when I have done their little measurements on other patterns, I have, because they're going to give you the option of an AB cup, a C cup, or a D cup, okay? Those three. AB is together, there you go, AB is together, and then C or D. When I'm done their little cheat sheet, I've come up with D, but D has been too much. So because I have past experience, I'm scaling down to C. What I would recommend is if you've never done this before, do what they recommend first. It might work for you, you never know. But it's easier to make something smaller by taking it in than to have to make it bigger. And especially for something that has a button up front, you don't want those buttons to be under strain because that's never pleasant. So that's my opinion on that. So anyhow, that's how I'm cutting it out. All right, so I was just cutting out my pieces and I started, you know, just chopping away and on the bodice side front, the lines are reversed on the inside, and I'm just used to, oh, okay, I'm going to cut this line. Well, no, I needed to cut the outside line instead of the inside line. So, long story short, I needed to put my pattern back together. So, what I do is I got a scrap of my very lightweight interfacing that I use for everything, and I fused my main piece back onto it, and then I could place my little edge, fuse that on, and now it's all together. And I can safely come back and cut out the appropriate size. But I actually, if I have a pattern that's like a favorite pattern and I'm going to use it over and over again, what I have done in the past is just fuse my lightweight interfacing to the entire back of every single piece, so that way they're really durable. They're not going to tear, and they last well, and they don't take up a lot of bulk, and you can still fold them up and everything. So highly recommend. But I thought, you know what, someone else might cut this piece out wrong. So okay, so out of all of the pieces, because I was able to cut different cup size, I'm not adjusting the bodice, but I am going to be adjusting this piece, this sleeve piece. And here is my main reason. This is going to be a set-in sleeve, and I want to make sure I have plenty of ease of movement. Okay, so the size that I'm cutting out says that it has 14 inches for a width here. Yes, that will go around my arm, but not enough so that when I want to raise my arm, I'll be able to do it without everything binding and everything looking wonky. What I want is between a 17 and an 18 inch finished sleeve, which may end up looking, well, look at her arm there. It looks like it's poking out a few inches. So I think I'm actually going to get enough ease to have the same look that she has if I do that. Just because, you know, I have larger arms, that's life. So what I'm going to need to do is add a lot to this sleeve on the sides. I'm going to need to add, if it has 14 inches, I'm going to need to add between 3 and 4 inches to each side of this sleeve, but I want to do it in such a way that I am not adding a whole lot of gathers and everything up here to the top, so that it still has the same general look that was intended. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut here, because I'm doing the short sleeve version. Just understand that what I do for my short sleeve version, the same would still apply for the long sleeve version, okay? In general, actually I can't even say that because of the sleeve versions they have, because of this and everything. Because for this one, you're going to have to coordinate it with the part of the sleeve that's above this flared part, so that those two match. So, and for this one, you're going to not want the 3/4 length to be ultimately huge, and you'll want to bring it in just a bit. So, let me tell you a couple things really quickly, get my first couple cuts made, and then I'm going to cut it off for my length. That's what I'm going to do. So if you can see, let me pull this down here. I am lining this up so that the dot at the top center of the sleeve is on one of my grid lines, okay? And I am also lining up the grain line so that it runs straight down, you know, that it's parallel with one of my grid lines. So everything is square when I place it on my table. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. Put a couple weights on it just so she does not want to move. And then I can get ready to draw some lines. So the first thing I'm going to do is lining up my ruler here with a top dot and making sure that I am on the straight. Just going to draw a line straight down the very center here, okay? Now where this bullseye is supposed to be the widest point. So again, trying to keep everything flat. I'm going to draw a line straight across at that bullseye, keeping everything. Where are you? Oh, that's close enough right there. on the straight. So that's gonna be putting this line, probably 5/8 inch, you know, a seam allowance below the edge of that armhole point right here. What I'm going to do right now is just go ahead and cut this line from the very bottom all the way up to the dot for my size, okay? It's still very rough out here. And then I'm going to cut straight across here to about 5/8 inch in on each side, okay? So it'll still be attached way out here and up here at the top. All right, so I went ahead and cut this out so that it is fitting for my size. I'm trying to figure out how to get it on the camera so I can see everything because it's such a large piece. We might just do this in sections. So there's 3 different views on this pattern. There's the 3/4 length, there's that flared extra piece that's sewed on, and there's the short one. What I would do if it was the 3/4 length one I was doing, first you need to measure what, and this is assuming you don't want this part to be huge, okay? What I would do is measure this length on your pattern before you start manipulating it and make a note of that, okay? Then say you want to add 2 inches. Up here, because I've got it cut here, here, come on, lift for me, and up here, all the way to the top, okay? I would open this up, so just spread it out, so there is 2 inches, and you can see on my grid here, I've got 2 inches between these 2 edges up here, okay? Let's just put a weight on there to hold them in place. Then I'm going to angle these pieces back in so that at whatever width you want down here. So say you measured the original pattern and you want it 1 inch wider at the bottom. You know, just measure your arm, figure out how much ease you want, come up with your own solution of what would be comfortable for you. And whatever that measurement is, if it's the original one, well, you can just put it together. If you want it 1 inch wider, well, add 1 inch down here, and so on and so forth, okay? If you're doing the one with the flounce that's sewed on, and it would be sewn on from this point, okay? Okay, so let's say you did not want to have to change or manipulate this piece down here, and you're making this view. What you're going to need to do is once you add, say, your hypothetical 2 inches up here, you're going to need to bend these all the way into that point. So that's kind of a severe angle there. If it was me and I was adding that much up here, I would add to this piece down here. That's kind of a circular piece, so it shouldn't be that much to go ahead and add to it. So if it was me, if at this point it would be more comfortable to be, say, still 2 inches apart, on this piece I would just add 1 inch to each side of that piece, you know. But I'm not doing either of those. I am doing the short sleeve version. So I'm going to cut it here. Okay, I'm going to save these because I do like 3/4 sleeves, so I might want that later. So I have these still 2 inches apart, okay? Now I want extreme. I was thinking 4 inches, I'm going to go with 3 inches. Up here at the top, I'm just kind of folding a little pleat, so that's going to work. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up a little more so I have 3 inches in between here. I think that will work for me. So now I have this really, really spread out sleeve. And if I just put these straight down, well, they're going to be a very, very flare sleeve. I don't want that. I want it more straight. I need to make sure that these 2 points are still in the same range so that I can get my sleeves nice and square. And that looks pretty good. So this is at 3 inches here. So now I can take this piece, lift it up, and turn it so that the edge of this piece is squared on my grid. Pop that there. Same thing down here. Lift this up and turn it so that this edge is squared on my grid, like that. Okay, and by doing that, I should still have 3 inches or thereabouts right here, and I do. So that's how I'm going to do it. I need to get some tape, tape all this together. I'm going to get a little extra piece of tissue paper to tape in the middle just to hold all of this in place, and I will be right back. Okay, so here is my sleeve piece now. Yes, it looks a little wonky, but it should work. So that's what I'm going to be cutting out. Everybody, it's been actually a couple days and lots of stuff going on. In case you've been following me for a while, you might have seen my very elderly cat. She's a little tortie, Thumbelina. Thumbelina passed away, so you know, she has gone on to play in kitty heaven, and I am sure that she is young and perky now. She was almost 21, you know, long good life. But, you know, that was our passing yesterday, so we're, she was a good cat. She was a real good cat. We have others, you know. I still have this troublesome one who thinks that the sewing room is hers. So it's been a very wet day, and I've been doing a lot of things outside, so I've been in and out, and my hair is whatever. But let me tell you what I've been thinking. I have of this fabric, thinking of fabric here, you know, shifting gears from cats to fabric. I woke up and I was like, you know what? That's not going to work, because I have enough fabric. It calls for 3 yards for my size for the view that I want, and I have that. I haven't measured it right now, but before I pre-washed it, it was 3 1/4, so I should be fine. But I didn't take into account matching any plaids, and it just hit me that I didn't do that, and something this plaid-ish, if I don't match that, you know, it'll really bother me. So, new fabric. And because it is me, I reached into my stores in the closet and grabbed out some very subdued, very serious gray colored corduroy. It seems like it's corduroy season, you know. I just made those corduroy pants, and this is actually a very similar weight, very lightweight baby cord. So I'm going to be cutting it out of baby cord corduroy instead of my very colorful plaid. So anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and get started laying all that out and cutting it out. If something comes up, I'll turn the camera on and show you. Otherwise, I will be back later. Okay, so I'm going along. Everything's going fine. I wanted to point out that the version I'm doing has more of the flared A-line skirt. And there's there's one piece, this one skirt piece 12, and it is cut on a bias, okay? So you have to open up your fabric flat, place one so that this line goes with your straight of grain, so it's kind of like off center, like that, okay? Put it back in, and cut one, then flip your pattern piece upside down, reorient it, and cut it again, okay? So just wanted to point that out. Other than that, everything's going good. This is corduroy, so just like other corduroys and napped fabrics, it's really, really important to make sure that every single piece is always cut the same direction. So the top of every piece is one way, the bottom of every piece is another way, or else the nap will make the corduroy look different shades. And for these pieces, they are cut on a diagonal. Well, there's kind of an upside, you know. The uppermost corner, I would say, is on the up way instead of the down way. So hope that makes some kind of sense. Let me finish cutting all this out. All right, so I just realized when I unfolded it all flat, I already cut out one piece. The fold line all the way down, my entire piece is bleached out. you know? We're just gonna go with it. Hopefully the bodice pieces aren't gonna have that on because I cut them. You know, the back I cut on the fold, so my back's gonna have a stripe going straight up it. The skirt, because it is cut on a diagonal, will have a diagonal stripe going across it. But you know what, at this point I'm calling it a design feature and moving forward. So when you see that, that is the fold line. How exciting, huh? Okay, so I got my fabric cut out and I'm trying to come up with a strategy because I am not going to be assembling the way that they are in a couple places, you know, because I am me. The first thing I can tell you is I am using a 20-inch zipper instead of a 16-inch zipper because that's the size in an invisible zipper that I have that matches. And honestly, the longer that side zipper is, the easier it's going to be to get in and out of. So if you have to guess up or guess down, do yourself a favor and guess up and get a longer one if you need to. The other thing is they want you to put your zipper in one of the very last steps, which is very frustrating when you're trying to do it because you're working inside of a dress that's basically already pulled together. So let's say that the zipper is over here on this side. The way that I'm going to construct the dress is basically make all of the front and attach it to the skirt. Make all of the back and attach it to the skirt, and then put the zipper on the side where there's supposed to be a zipper. And that way I can butterfly the whole thing out so it's nice and flat before when I put in the zipper. So that way you can see everything you're dealing with and you're not working, you know, trying to look inside of something. So anyhow, once I get the zipper in, then I can just sew up the other side seam, easy peasy. The other thing is, it looks like one of the main focal points of this is a very dramatic lapel, okay? And they even make a note of where the roll line is on this front piece and one of the collar pieces, this under collar, okay? So I'm going to be interfacing things a little bit differently. What they ask you to do in the very first step here is to interface the upper collar, the lower collar, the front facing, and the back facing. Okay, so what I am going to be using for all of this, I am going to completely interface just like they're showing here with my extremely lightweight interfacing. This is the one that's the extremely lightweight. You can't get any lighter than that. It's fusible. It's going to keep the thread stable, but it's not going to add any thickness. It's not going to add any crispness, okay? Then, after that is all done, I am going to come back and put an additional interfacing up here in this lapel section on my front piece and above the roll line up here in this collar piece. All right, so that this has enough oomph to hold itself together to be the nice dramatic lapel that they want. Because it's always disappointing when you get done and you have a wimpy lapel, you know? So anyhow, let me put this piece number 1 aside. I'm not going to deal with it yet. And for 6, 7, 8, 9, I'm going to go ahead and use my lightweight interfacing and fuse it all over these pieces just to get that out of the way. What I'm going to work on now is the special interfacing for above the roll line on this collar piece and the little front lapel part. I just want to get all this out of the way. And basically what I need to do, because the interfacing I'm going to be using for that part is going to be stiffer. It is more substantial. It is this one here. They call featherweight. I call it medium weight, you know, potato. But I have my very, very lightweight interfacing fused all over, okay? Because it's very, very lightweight, it's easy. You don't have to worry about making special trims for bulk, But for that one, you do, because the last thing you want in a very pointy lapel is to have extra bulk. So what I'm going to do, this is that undercollar, is to make a pattern that I can use to cut out the heavy interfacing, okay? And this pattern has a 5/8 inch seam allowance in the collar. I can tell from measuring from the center of the circle for my size to the cut line. Okay, so what I'm do is I have wax paper. I got my pattern piece down here first, just sitting there. However, taped a piece of wax paper from the kitchen on top of it. Set my little ruler here to 5/8 of an inch. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is run the one side on the cutting line, the other side, the pointy metal side, is going to be tracing a line that's going to be my cut line for my interfacing pattern. So I've done this one. I know you probably can't see it, but just trust me. I only want above this roll line, okay? So from this roll line position, making sure I'm still at 5/8 because it wants to move, come up here. Okay, now I want to cut it at that roll line, so I'm just going to draw that. It's kind of an awkward angle here, but we will make do. And that comes all the way over here, okay? Now this is a seamed back, okay, so I need to also take out 5/8 of an inch. Oh, it's very awkward. Hang on, I'm going to pull my arm in the middle of the picture here. And again, at the very top, also all the way across like that. Okay, so now that I have that done, I can lift my piece of wax paper off. And you might not be able to see, but I can see my pattern here. So let me go ahead and cut it. So now that that is cut out, I'm just going to double check by putting it on top of my pattern to see how I line up. And right there. Okay, that's pretty good. So I have this is trimmed on my roll line, okay? I have a seam allowance all the way around and I'm good. So I need to cut 2 of these out in my heavier interfacing, and I'm going to make I'm going to make another pattern just like this for my front lapel. Okay, so I still have this pinned to my fabric, but I am going to leave it pinned because that might give me a little bit of cushion, which might give me a little bit of, you know, more oomph for tracing on my wax paper if there's some cushion. So again, the first thing I'm going to do is find the roll line for my size and trace down that roll line. Approximately ish. Okay. Then keeping my ruler at 5/8 of an inch, run it down the side. Ooh, that is going to dig a lot more. I'm going to go this way. It's actually a lot easier to do this when it's pinned fabric. Just, you know, heads up there. I kind of dug in too much up there. And again up here, just going straight across. Like that. Okay, so now, once again, I'm going to come back in here and trim along my little traced line. And this should be approximately where that roll line is, the fold line for the lapel. So if I place this here, let's see, how does it work? there's my line there, works great. So again, I'm going to cut 2 of these out of my heavier interfacing also. But I'm just going to set this aside for a bit. And it looks like the first pieces we're going to be working with is piece number 1, the bodice front. I don't know why I set it aside when I just have to grab it right back, but here we are. So there's a lot of things to mark on this piece, but before I do any of that, I want to get my little interfacing fused on. So what I'm going to be doing, sticking my little piece of leather right under the tissue, and at the very top of the roll line for my size, I'm going to punch that out, and at the very bottom of the roll line for my size, I'm going to punch that out also. Now, yay, I'm looking at the wrong side. That is good. Let me get one of my heat erasable markers. Draw a dot at the beginning, a dot at the end. Pull these out for a second here. Get my ruler, and with my heat erasable pen, which will disappear as soon as I iron it, draw a line connecting those 2 dots, okay? Now I'm going to take my interfacing, make sure I'm using the right one with the fusible dots down, and I'm going to line up that roll line edge with that line I just drew, giving myself a 5/8 inch seam allowance up here and right here, okay? So I'm going to do this for both of my front pieces, get this fused on first, and then I'll come back and do all the other markings. Hello everybody. Took a couple days off. I had to take care of a bunch of paperwork yesterday and just some general regrouping. So now I'm excited to get onto this dress. And at first I was like, oh, gray, how sad. But you know what? I think it's more classic, so I'm happy about that. So let me push this cat off of my chair here because, you know, she lives. And get started. So the first thing is these panels, these interface panels have been added on and fused onto my front pieces. So now I'm going to get started actually transferring all of my markings and everything over. So while I have everything separated here, I'm going to go ahead and punch out the circles for all of the markings that I need. Oops, twist that back on. I have one here. One here. There should be a shoulder triangle. Yes, there is. Mine is the second one. Over here for sleeve placement. There are some for buttons and buttonholes. At this point, I'm just going to put a little chunk in the center. And over here where the buttonholes go, I mark the very beginning and the very end of each buttonhole. And let's see, I do believe that this is the one for the size I'm going to do here, so that way I can get those all marked out. So now I can place this on top of my fabric, and I'm marking it on the wrong side of the fabric. Okay, so I am just going to put a couple pins on here just to roughly hold it together while I get marking. I use my heat erasable pen, not marking those anymore because that was just for placement for this triangle, but marking the beginning and end. And honestly, these for the buttons, they're going to be coming off. I'm going to be ironing this so much between now and when I put buttons and buttonholes on that they will disappear. Or am I? No, you know what? It's going to be a whole lot easier to put the buttonholes on this thing before I actually close up and construct the front. So I might be doing that earlier. So anyhow, do that. For my notches, what I do is I just clip into my fabric, and these printed notches here are actually fairly shallow, so that's fine. These are a princess seam, so there's always a notch above and below the fullest part of the curve. And I've got them up here. So let me finish getting all of these clipped and marked on both of them. Okay, so this dress is not lined, so my seam allowances will be showing, so I need to make sure that I finish them off well. But the first thing I'm going to be doing is doing some stay stitching here, okay? So along the entire princess seam side, this whole stretch right here, going to be doing a row of stay stitching at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. It's just a regular straight stitch, just to keep it from, you know, stretching out of place. And then up here where this corner is, I'm probably going to stitch, you know, about 1 inch or so this direction, turn, and at 5/8, or just barely under 5/8. I'm going to be stitching this. I'm going to try to get, I have a thread that will match this really well, so this is important because when we clip this, we need to clip all the way up to that stay stitch thread so that we can pop and turn this corner. So if you make your stay stitching too far in, it just doesn't work. So this one will be at 5/8. This one's going to be at about a 1/2 inch just because. And at the same time, when I get done with that, I am going to come all the way around and serge it just around the edges, trying my best not to cut off any fabric, just to make sure that I have nice clean edges that will not unravel. This is the machine I'm going to use today. This is my little 99 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐞. She was the first machine that she was in terrible shape, and she's the one that I tore apart, figured out how things work, put back together, painted, stripped, tried different decals and everything. She's been my guinea pig, so love Juliet. And this is what she's looking like right now. My lighting's a bit off. Maybe if I turn this off, that would help. So you can see, she's a lovely little 1923, very, very basic 99 𝐥, but we do love her, so she's gonna be sewing today. I love the little clinky noises that these old machines make. That's the noise when the hook inside here is going back and forth and kind of moving around. But if you can see, she does make a lovely little stitch. So that's going to be good for what we need for this dress. So between one straight stitch machine and a serger for my edging, I find for 99% of what I do, that is all I need. And I can tell I needed to iron this on a little bit better, you know. I'll do that in a moment. But let me go ahead and do this stay stitch up here, which is at 5/8. And this machine did not have markings on her plate. So basically I just measure out where 5/8 is, and I just drew a line with a Sharpie. If I want to, I can come back later and, you know, make that permanent with an engraver or something, but it works for now. Get to that little dot, lift up my presser foot and turn it, and come up this way. And that's about all I need, just a little bit on each side of that dot. Take up lever. And there we go, that part's done here. So I'm going to go ahead and press this back on, because that's my bad, and do the other side. So when I'm serging and I'm going around the edges, I try to make sure I don't cut anything off. And if I do, it's just tiny. Okay, let me turn this down so you can see here. And what I wanted to show you is how I turn corners. I come all the way so that my needle passes the end of the fabric. This is for an outside corner. With the needle up, I lift the presser bar, flip it over, turn it down. Now I only have one needle threaded, the smaller, the closer needle. I should just take this other needle out because I don't use it. But with just having the one needle in there, I have a smaller seam allowance type thing here. This is closer to 1/8 of an inch. If I put the second needle thread on, it makes it more of like almost a 1/4 inch wide for the serging, and that's a little too wide for me. So for an inside corner, like right here, let me back you out. What I'm going to do is just open it flat like this. So I come up to getting pretty close to where my blade and my needle are working, and just open this all the way so I can just continue straight. Okay, so let me see here. So if you can see, my inside corner gets in there nicely. My outside corners gets a nice corner, and I don't have to worry about cutting a bunch of stuff off, because see, for both of my front pieces, one I cut too wide, so I trimmed more off of one little spot. That's what that was. But that's it. So I'm not really cutting off a lot of fabric. It's just going to make sure that everything stays nice, and then this way I'm free to press my seam allowances open as I want to. So yeah, that's how I do it. Okay, so my side front's going to be the next piece I deal with. It's numbered differently depending on which cup size you cut out, but my number is 3. And this pattern has a side zipper. So there's a dot here for putting the zipper in. So I'm going to put that on. I'm actually probably going to pop it onto both sides, so that way I don't have to remember which side is which at this point. This bullseye right here is the apex, all right? And usually in patterns that have darts and things, I lower that by 1 inch. With princess seams, it's not as obvious if the apex is slightly higher or lower, because there's not a line pointing to the wrong point. Like, look, there's nothing here, you know, there's nothing like that going on. It's just that one seam. So I'm not worrying too much about that, but that's what that bullseye is. And so I'm going to go ahead, serge around both of these pieces, you know, clip my notches and make this marking right here. Okay, so now that those are both serged around, I'm going to match up my side front to my front at my princess seams, and I want to make sure that I match up my notches, which I have cleverly disguised. I can see them through my serging. I don't know if you can. I put a mark there so you can see it. So there's, like I said, there's usually one at the very bottom and one at the top part of the main part of the curve. Okay, I need to match these up with those notches on the front first. Okay, so I have the top. I put a mark where my notch is so you can see this pinned here flat, this pinned here flat. Now this is going to be a little trickier, and since we did this stay stitching, what I can do is come back and put a few clips here. I'm just going up to like 1/8 of an inch away from my stay stitching. I don't want it to get too crazy there, but if I lay it down flat with my side front down, because I have these clips, I should be able to kind of flex and mold this piece so it's going to fit. And this corduroy wants to grab itself like a flannel graph here. So let me get it all flattened out here for just 1 second. Okay, it was doing its grabbing itself thing here. So now if I line up the edges, I will be able to get a nice flat seam when I stick it on my machine. Okay, and when I sew it, I'm going to be looking at my front piece because that's where most of the curve is, and that way as I sew I can make sure I don't get any little creases or divots or anything in there. So I'm going to do this for both of them. Hang on, bread is ready. I need to sew from the top to the bottom on both of my front pieces. Okay, so now that these seams are sewn, I'm going to go over to my ironing board and press it open. So since I have these clipped up here, they're going to want to spread, okay? But when you press it open, this underside can get kind of lumpy. You can either notch it so that it will lay nice and flat. You can leave it the way it is, and you'll just have little wrinklies there. Another thing I like to do is see where the worst of it is and take a couple little triangles out of it, so that when I do iron it, it's just going to lay nice and flat like that. Okay, so for pressing a princess seam, the easiest way for me is to find something that is roughly the right shape. So for the bottom part of it, you know, I'm using my ham, my lovely ham that I made. I love my hams because they stand up on their own. You know, it's like Weebles wobble. Well, they do fall down, but you know, they got a flat base on them. So I'm going to use the front part here because this is cotton. I'm using the cotton side, and I could use the wool side too. You know, honestly, it's It's not that big a deal. The wool side is better at moving steam, but that's okay. So I'm just going to lightly press this open here, up at the top, press this part open just to get it started. And then I'm going to, wow, lots of steam on my camera. Sorry about that. I'm going to flip this upright because this part of my ham is the closest to the shape of a boob, which is what I need to be forming. There, I think that's better for steam, which is what I need to be forming this part here too. So with this just very roughly pressed open, I'm going to set it from the outside. And that's because from the outside, I can make sure that I'm not getting any wrinkles in there. So just spreading it out over the top of my ham, throwing in some steam, trying not to steam my fingers, smoothing it out, pressing it in. So I have a nice smooth seam right there. And there you go. That is a nicely pressed princess seam. So I'm working on strategy here, and let me tell you my dilemma. They want you to put your buttonholes on when you're at the very, very end, and I don't want to. I think I would do better putting them on while it's nice and flat. But in order to put the buttonholes on, you have to have the facing in. But you can't, up here, the facing goes on top of the collar, and you can't put the collar on until you have the front and back sewn together at the shoulders. So here's my thought. Let me get a piece of paper. It might make more sense if I draw it out for you. Sometimes when I draw it, I can work through things a little bit better in my mind. Okay, so let's say this is my front. Okay, just for roughness sake, we're going to say it buttons that way. I can't remember if it does or not. And here's my skirt. And my pen is running out of ink. Hang on a second. Okay, so my greatest desire as far as construction is that, first of all, I can put my zipper in down this side before this side is sewn closed, so I can butterfly it out. All right. My second greatest desire is that I can sew buttonholes over here before all of this is constructed, because it'll be a lot easier for me to get it onto my machine with my buttonholer. To do that, I know these are off center, just ignore that, okay? So in order to do that, so I can have my lovely lapels and collar, what I'm going to do is construct the front, just like I have it here, and sew it to the skirt. I'm going to construct the back, and I'm going to connect them at the shoulders. Okay, well this is awkward here, but pretend that you know what I mean. Okay, this is the back of it. I'm going to leave it, I'm going to make the whole thing so I can make the collar, make the facing, have it attached at the shoulder. So my dress is going to basically look like this. You know, sleeves will come later. And then once it's like this, then I can still fold it and put the zipper in over here. But this way I can, before I attach this skirt here, I should be able to be in a position where I can make these buttonholes easier. So let me take it step by step. You know, if it works, it works. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes I work myself into a pickle, so we will see. I have my front facing pieces that I fused that lightweight interfacing to. I cut it very roughly, as you can see. I need to go ahead and just serge all the way around these edges. I'm just gonna, you know, trim this evenly as I do it. So this is off and keep it nice and contained. Once I have these serged, I will be back and we will mark them up and match it. I'm going to focus on my left side because, as you can see in the diagram, this is the side, oops, hang on. This is the side that has the buttonholes. Okay, so for right now, I'm not too sure why I wanted to jump onto the facing after deciding all of this, because it's not time for the facing yet. But I am glad I serged around it. You know, they look much neater right now. what I'm going to do is grab my bodice back piece. You know, putting this aside, grabbing my bodice back piece, which was cut on a fold, which will probably have a stripe going up the back, but you know, whatever. And I need to get started marking all of my marks. There's a dart in the back here and lots of spots, but I am going to also be serging around this after I put my dart in. So first, let me punch all my circles, clip my notches, and I'll be right back. All right, so with all of my dots on and notches clipped, I'm going to draw the lines so I can make these back darts. I do like to do this. It just really helps me make a nice seam. And now to make the dart, what I do is put a pin straight down in that first dot, coming back up in the second dot, and up here at the top, pinching at that point, pressing this pin all the way through, which gives me my crease. Put a pin at the top. This is a very long dart, so I'm going to put one halfway through and anchor this pin at the bottom. And when I go to sew it, I'm going to start at my outside edge and come all the way in. I am not going to be backstitching this. First of all, because it's very narrow up here, and second of all, because 𝐥𝐢𝐤𝐞 does not have a backstitch. Now there's a way that you can do it roughly, you know, and I'll show you that, but for something as fine as the very top of a very narrow dart, I don't trust myself. So up here, I'm just going to run all the way off the edge and tie those threads afterwards. I get up for literally 2 minutes and she's back in the chair, just, you know. But we love her, yes we do. Okay, so how I backstitch on a machine that does not have a backstitch is I take my first couple stitches, okay, with my needle up all the way and my thread take up lever up all the way. I lift up my presser foot, pull the whole thing forward, and let the needle go down in the exact same row that I stitched before, and then just follow my line. And I'm getting very close to the edge here, and I'm just going to run straight off. So now that I've come off the edge, I'm just going to pull it off, give myself enough of a tail, okay, that I have plenty of room to work here. And then up here, where I have, you know, my threads coming off, I just loop it around my fingers to make one big old knot like this. Stick a straight pin through that loop and into the fabric at the very edge. And then I pull those threads and my little knot's gonna work its way exactly down to where I need. And then I'm just gonna clip, you know, about 3/8 of an inch or so from that point. And that is it. So I'm gonna need to press these. I believe that these should be pressed towards the center back. Okay, so I've got these pressed towards the center back, and now I'm gonna go ahead and serge around the edges. But I wanted to put my darts in first, so that way when I serge straight across here, the serging is going to hold the dart in the right position. Okay, so at this point, I am going to be sewing the fronts to the backs just at the shoulder seams. Not dealing with this right now, just matching it up and going straight across the top here at 5/8 of an inch and then pressing these seam allowances open. Now I can tell you that there is some easing worked into the back here. So the back is slightly larger than the front. This is how I'm going to do it. I just fold it in half. Hang on, do it this way, it'll make more sense to me. Fold it in half. This is the outside corner, this is the notch where this pin is, okay? Like that. Find the midpoint right here, put a pin there. Okay, now when I go to sew it, This is not a whole lot of extra ease. The feed dogs can work it in, or I can just stretch like crazy and it'll work in. So I'm going to make sure that the back side, which is the side that's slightly larger, is down against the feed dogs. The front is up towards the needle side, and those feed dogs will work any extra in that I need. Okay, so now that those shoulder seams are done, I'm going to get started on the collar. And I did not fuse this on yet, so that's going to be my first step, is fusing my extra interfacing piece onto my collar. And the way that I will place that is punch a hole. You can't see that. Punch a hole here at the beginning of that collar line, and down here at the end of that roll line. And then I can place this piece on my collar piece. It looks like my collar piece is a little bit large. Look at that. It must have expanded as I ironed. So the first thing I need to do is trim my piece here. Oh, hang on a second. Let me just trim that extra off. We don't need that over there confusing at this point. Okay, so if I make a little dot at the beginning of that roll line and one down here at the end, I'll have to punch out and mark these later. I don't want to do that now because since I'm going to be going over to the ironing board to iron, if I mark all my other things right now, they are just going to disappear, and that's kind of pointless. Okay, so now I'm going to pick the interfacing piece, if my fingers will let me. It goes with this side. I'm placing the beginning of the bottom where the roll line is at this dot, and the end of it where this dot is. That fits perfectly. So I'm going to iron this one on and do the same thing to this side. Once I have that done, then I'm going to put them together and sew them together in the center back right here, and then press that seam allowance open. I'm actually going to pink these before I press it open, just because I think that might help it lay a little bit better. And now that this is pressed open and everything, I'm going to go ahead and transfer the markings for the collar over. So I have a dot here, a dot here. This triangle here is the shoulder placement, and I have a few notches to trim there. So I'm going to be making my collar slightly different than the instructions say, you know, no surprise. So let me go ahead and get this marked, and I'm going to also transfer over the markings on this, which is the top collar. It's basically the same markings as here, but on this one, you know, dots and notches, and I'll be right back. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to follow their directions, because what I was going to do was angle in my under collar so that it would curl in, but I can see that their under collar is slightly smaller, and at first I was like, oh my gosh, I cut wrong again. But on the, where's the pattern pieces? Up here, it says stretch. It's like, aha, they're onto something here. So the point of this is so that we can understitch the top, but the sides will want to curl in so that we won't see that side seam. So this is actually a very good collar. I highly approve of this collar. So when you go to pin it together though, the one that does not have a seam is going to feel a little awkward. It's going to feel like it doesn't quite meet on the sides. It's okay. What I would suggest is, first of all, mark your very center. Now my very center has a line on it, so that's kind of obvious. But I'm going to go ahead and mark it on the wrong side here too, okay? Because matching up the center backs and the two top corners is going to be helpful to do first. And this corner up here and the other corner match together. Okay, so I have my center back, this side over here, and this side over here pinned. So now we have this gap here. All right, I am going to pin it by folding it in half, finding that midpoint, put a pin in the middle here, and when you go to sew it, the hard part is they want you to stretch this as you're sewing it, which you can do if you have a fairly lightweight interfacing on this, which I do. If you have a heavy duty sewn in interfacing, it might make it a little bit tough, but you know what? Everything is possible. So you can see here, they say stretch. I'm usually an ease it in, but they say stretch. So I'm going to stretch the smaller one so it matches, okay? And I think that's why they had you cut this one on a bias so that it does have that ability to stretch. So yeah, I like this color. It's kind of fun, kind of intriguing. So anyhow, what I need to do once I get this pinned is sew it, and there's a dot here and a dot in the same place on the other side. You start sewing at that dot, come up, and actually I am going to mark where that point is up here so I can make sure I have a nice sharp place to pivot. But you come up here, pivot at 5/8 each side, and then go straight across, back down, and stop at this dot over here. So just because sometimes I don't eyeball things as well as I can, I am just using my little piece o tape, you know, because it's 5/8 of an inch wide, and I can give myself a little mark where I can come up and head that way and know that I'm in line with my fabric. Okay, so here we are. So, wrong scissors, grabbing these, I am just going to pink this edge over here and this edge over here. And we're going to understitch the top of the collar. So the one that does not have a seam line is the top of the collar. That's the visible one. Oops, hang on just one sec. I gotta tell you what I just noticed. When I was sewing it, my little seam allowance flipped over, and I do not feel like taking this seam line out right now, you know? It's just not one of those days, so I just clipped it on either side of that seam so I can flip it back open, because I do want it open, because that way it'll lay flatter. So anyway, there you go. But what I was going to say is this is the bottom of the collar, so that's the private side, okay? This that does not have the seam is the public side, that's the outside. So when we understitch on the side that no one sees, the private side. So you have to kind of open up your collar like so, pushing the seam allowances over here towards this side, okay? So on this side, no seam allowance. On this side, all the seam allowance, okay? And starting up in this corner, as far as you can get, I probably am going to start about 1 inch or so in, you know, wherever I can get my little presser foot in right there. And sew a seam on this side, on the underside, about 1/8 of an inch in, straight seam all the way down, and making sure that all of this stuff is underneath there. Okay, so there's my understitching on the wrong side. That is it on the right side, okay? Pretty close to the edge. What I'm going to be doing is coming in here, and the seam allowance that is closest to the undercollar, I am going to grade that shorter. I'm going to use pinking shears. I'm going to come in here and cut about half the width of that seam allowance off here. Okay, so with that one trimmed, I'm going to leave the top one just the way it is. Come in here and trim some of the bulk out of this corner. Okay, so it looks like that. And over here on this one, the same. Okay, and now I should be ready to turn it over. Get something to poke out this corner. Once I get that turned, I need to go over to my ironing board and press it. Now, this front part, okay, that does not have a seam in the middle, When you look at the edge, because of the understitching, you should not be seeing any stitching here, okay? It should just have a nice rolled edge. That understitching is going to pull all of this stuff to the back, so that's not visible. Okay, so make sure when you're pressing it that it looks like that. Now the side seams, because this piece was slightly narrower than this side, what I would do is try to match up Ooh, we got a storm going. My lights keep flickering. Match up the center, and when you're ironing it, try to roll these edges slightly towards the back. Okay, kind of like that, where this is looking at from the back side, so that from the front side you don't see any seam line. Okay, so I have turned it, I have pressed it, the bottom part here is still open. What I want to do right now is get this roll line thing situated so I can feel where that thicker interfacing is. And it comes around like this. So if I grab my ham and pretend that this top up here is my neck, I'm just playing with it to see how that roll line is going to work. You know, I really need to make myself a ham that is the size of my neck, because every time I have a collar I run into this issue. But I'm just going to raise up my camera so you can see what I'm doing. Pin it down here. It is folded at that roll line. Bring it up and around. And on this side, where I can feel it finishing up, I'm going to pin it over here. Okay, so this is basically the shape of my collar. I'm going to go back to my ironing board. I'm not going to iron it per se, but I'll hold my iron fairly close to it and put a whole lot of steam on it and just kind of pinch it and everything with my fingers so that it can get accustomed to folding over in that spot. I want to do this before I baste the bottoms together and trim them, because the top, because it's curving over the bottom, it needs more surface area to curve, so that might impact the finished length, because you saw when I was just done sewing, they were slightly different lengths, and you'll probably have that too. So let me go ahead over to my ironing board, hit this with some steam, and just let it rest for a little while. Good morning, it is the next day, actually the next day afternoon, but you know, who's counting at this point? So this sat on my ham all night. It is nicely formed. And now what I'm going to do is baste this closed, but I want to baste it closed based on where it is folded while this is folded, okay? So I'm just going to grab a few clips, pins would work too, and pin it in place so that they won't slip. And a second. Okay, so with those pinned, I think that will work a lot better. So I just have my needle and thread, and the basting is going to go from this point up here down and across and back up. And I'm going to do it probably at about 1/4 inch in, and I am doing it by hand instead of by the machine, just because I want to make sure that these edges stay where they are. And no, they are not exactly lined up. And no, I am not starting exactly at the edge, but that's okay for right now. So anyhow, let me just get this done. Big long stitches just to hold it together for just a bit, and I will be right back. Okay, so I am just going to set this aside for a moment here and get my bodice. That does not belong here. And I need to place my bodice right side up, so I'm looking at the correct side of my fabric. Now, to pin the collar on, At the point where my stay stitching comes to a corner, that is one dot that I need to pay attention to. And then up here midway, there's another dot, and also center back and the shoulder seams. All of those should have matching points on your collar. If you are like me and you've ironed it several times, all of my points have disappeared. So I'm going to go really quickly and draw those back onto my collar piece. Okay, so I can mark that point out there. The shoulder point, my center back is right here. So, and of course I have a faded stripe on my center back, so that's easy to find. So now placing it so that fabric is right side up, the part of the collar with the seam is down, okay? So right side up on my collar, right side up on my fabric. I'm going to start by matching up my center back. And you know what, just to make life easier, these are not exactly level. I am trimming them to the shortest level one, just so it will be easy for me to match things up. Okay, that looks better for me. So I'm going to match up that center back here. And once that is done, I'm going to match up this dot here with the shoulder seam. So I'm just going to stick a pin through this dot, and down below stick a pin about 5/8 inch in on that shoulder seam and press it straight through. Rotate this so it lines up this way, okay, and then anchor that pin in. Do the same thing over here. Now you're probably going to be having to make some little notches in the bodice fabric, and I will do that in just a moment once I get all my main landmarks pinned together here. Okay, now this one, here's where our stay stitching is. I'm going to trim it all the way up to, but not passing that stay stitching, so I can open this up this way. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Okay, now this point right here matches up with this point right here. And they are shaped totally different, but trust me, it will work okay. So if I put a pin through there, and I'm placing my pin a little up because when I trimmed it, that's about 5/8 inch in each way, okay? So I'm placing my pin through that and through here. And if I open it up, it's pretty close for right now. That's okay. Now, in here, this is going to be okay. I think it's more the back, where between this point and my shoulder seam, it looks like that's going to lay nice and flat, so I can put a pin midway. But back here at the back collar, I should have stay stitched this already. I skipped that step, but I'm this far along. I'm just going to hope for the best, but you should stay stitch it. I completely skipped that step, so sorry. I'm making my clips only about 1/4 inch deep, so I should be okay. But with my clips like that, I can kind of flare it open so I can match it up back here, okay? So that way I can go ahead and pin this. Back here, okay? So this is what this side looks like. This is the center back, pinned flat here, clipped here. This is completely open because I need the edge of this point here of my collar to lay against this dot, okay? So there's that dot, there's the edge of my collar. And I'm just going to stick a pin up here where the edges are even. Okay, and from that point to this point that we clipped all the way up to that dot, it is still fairly open. But it's going to open up enough that we can stitch it flat. Okay, so this is just one side. I will pin the other side exactly the same way. All right, so now that this is done, I'm going to come back and baste the entire thing on so I can remove all of these pins, because we're not actually going to stitch it on by machine until we get the facing pieces on. So it's important that this stays exactly where you want it to. So again, I'm going to probably, I'm going to baste it actually a little bit higher. The first time was at about 1/4 inch. I'm going to bounce it up to about 3/8 of an inch here, getting closer to my actual stitching line. I still don't want to go all the way up to 5/8 because then my basting stitches might show, which is not the end of the world. I can just pull them out if I need to, but you know how it goes. Okay, so with that part done, I'm getting my facing pieces here, and I am just going to sew together my front and back facings up here at the shoulder. So the typical sewing it at 5/8 and then pressing the seam allowances open. I have serged all the way around both of these pieces already. The instructions say to finish off the edge of your facing in the manner you find appropriate. So this is the easiest for me right now. So just like on the main fabric piece, there is a dot that should be right here that I need to stay stitch. And so since when I serged it, I kind of rounded out that corner just a bit, I'm just going to draw it on with some lines here. So putting my 5/8 inch mark at the very edge of my fabric, I can figure out where that dot is. So I'm just going to, actually I'll probably go a couple inches this side, backstitch it once here, and then come up here. And I'm going to do that. Actually, once I get here, I'm going to go ahead and stay stitch all the way around the back of the collar, okay? And then come back over here. I'll make that same point and come up to about there on my stay stitching. Okay, so once again, on the facing, I am clipping all the way up to that point, okay? I'm going to do that on both sides, and then make a lasagna of the entire thing all together here. Okay, so here's my collar, and I'm going to start out by matching up my center back, which has my lovely faded stripes, so that's very easy to do here. And I can tell you that on mine, at least, this little corner area over here, it's wanting to be kind of a little pain about staying in its rightful place, even with the basting. So before I actually stitch it, I am going to make double sure that this point is where it needs to be, because it seems like it's wanting to fall down. Maybe it's the weight of the bodice, I don't know. But let me go ahead and get this pinned up here. Basically match everything up the same as on the other side. This will come all the way to this outside edge and straight down. So I'll get it all pinned up and show you what it looks like. So I'm pinning it, and I get to the bottom of both of my pieces, and the facing piece is longer. I mean, not by a whole lot, probably by something I could ease in. But I was figuring, well, I can just cut it off. But it got me curious, and the pattern is just that way. If I line it up at the top here, right there, and I did cut the bottom for the appropriate place, it's just a little bit longer. Not a big deal, you know, but if you're a little paranoid about the lengths and everything, that's it. It's just the pattern, it's not you, and that's okay. So I'm just gonna let the facing be a little bit longer. It's not gonna worry me out. If I get to the point where I'm sewing on the skirt, I can just trim it or leave it. It's not going to be visible anyway at that point. So sewing this, I am just going to go and sew it on. I'm not going to baste it again. But what I can tell you is these corners are going to be tricky. They're going to be very tricky. So what I would do is actually start up here. I'm going to do the front facing parts last. So I'm going to go around the neck first, then down this way and down this way. And I'm not even going to do that. I'm going to start at the center back, come to this point. Center back, come to this point. Partly because I am dealing with a napped fabric that's going to want to walk and everything, but partly because I have a lot of layers and a tricky point to get to. So once I get this point done, Then I'm going to come and do this point and down, okay? And then I will come back here and do this point, and then lastly I will do down, because I'll probably go that way and then down. You know what I mean? But anyway, starting in center back, which I can find fairly easily, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to be looking at my bodice side, not my facing side, because in the whole scheme of things, I think it's more important for me to make sure that all of this stuff in the bodice doesn't get caught in there. So paying close attention to where I'm going. And I want to make sure I have my stay stitching, that I am on this side of the stay stitching, not the seam allowance side. So that stay stitching is going to be my stitch guide of where I need to go. Yep, I was right. This was pretty tricky right here, but I'm glad I did it in 2 different steps. Made it easier to move all the fabric one way and then the other way. But even doing that, one of my facing pieces here has a little pucker, but it is the facing, and so you know what? I'm not going to care. That's the facing on this side, and on the fabric side on this side, it looks good. And on the fabric side over here, you're seeing it the first time I am too. Well, I can see a little bit of my stay stitching, so no one's going to see that. That's going to be underneath the collar. I might do something with that. I might not. But on this side, I can tell that the facing is going to have just that one little pucker, but I don't care at this point, because if I pull all of the stitches out to fix that pucker, I could jeopardize getting this even worse than it is right now, so it's okay. So the next step is calling to trim, which I definitely need to, because I have a lot of stuff going on here. All right, so first off, my bodice piece, remember I basted it, so I'm basically only trimming about 1/4 inch off of there. That way I don't have to pull out my basting stitches. Come on. Now the second layer, which is all of the collar, which has all of that interfacing, I am going to pink that, because I can't trim it shorter than this one, just because that would be too tricky for me. But pinking it makes it a little more vague on where that actual edge is. So I think that that will work. Plus it'll help it to flex a little bit more. So let me do that to all the way across. Okay, so now at this point where we're going to need to turn it, I am just going to, in general, not too close to that stitching, but I want it, what is that? Maybe 1/8 of an inch away. I'm not too sure, but I needed to get some of that bulk out, so when I turn it, that'll be nice and flat. And also over here at the corner of my lapel, I am trimming that. Okay, so now turning it right side out, I need to get my little lapel corners popped out so they are as square as possible. Hang on a second. It's pretty good. And now I'm going to go ahead and press all of this so I have a nice clean seam going on. I got my collar part, this part pressed, but I need to understitch this side. The instructions don't actually call for you to do it, but it sure will make it turn nicer. Okay, so this is what it looks like right now. I've just pinned the sides together at about 5/8 of an inch so you can see how it's going to fit. And I've overlapped it based on my body size, okay? I wasn't exactly matching up where it was supposed to be on the pattern, but serendipitously, it does coincide with that placement. So that's good. So this is my moment where I'm going to go ahead and make my buttonholes, but I want to make sure that I put my buttonhole marks on here based on where it's going to line up with my body. Because if, let me come on this side, if I was not sure exactly where they were supposed to line up and I put them on and they were under strain, that would be bad. But since it's an overlapping front, you know, you have a little bit of wiggle room, you know what I mean? So anyhow, now that I have it pinned on here, and I can see a terrible, terrible mistake I just made. Oh my goodness. Wow, okay, let me explain what I did. Scoot her up here. So when I just now, the last step I did was understitching that front lapel, and I said, oh, this is not in the instructions, but it's good. And yeah, it makes it curve nicely, but I wasn't even thinking. When you do that, the understitching shows back here where it's folded. So that kind of stinks. What I'm going to do is pull out my understitching. I'm going to leave it down here at the very bottom. You can't even see what I'm pointing at. I'm going to leave it down here at the very bottom, but I'm going to pull out this understitching line up here. So everything I said earlier about, oh, understitch the front lapel, don't do that. That's a bad move, you know. So anyhow, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead, put marks on here because it's double-breasted, so there's 2 buttons. So first thing I need to do is actually figure out what buttons I'm going to be using so I can know what size buttonholes to make, and yeah, let's get started. Okay, so on the pattern, there are 4 buttons, okay? These 2 are decorative. These 2 are functional. So I only need to make these 2 buttonholes. These I'll just be sewing the buttons on. And let me show you the buttons I've chosen. They want shank buttons. The pattern calls for 3/4 inch. Well, these are closer to about a 1 inch. It is a shank button, but it's got little texture to it that kind of looks like corduroy. So I thought, well, that is highly appropriate. In addition to that, I have exactly 4 of these, which it calls for. So it was meant to be. So what I'm doing is I have my pattern here, and I've just kind of overlaid it onto the fabric so that I am lining up where it should be, because when I tried it on my dress form, it fitted as it should be, so that's good. So I'm just gonna, where I punched out my X's, those dots are where I'm just gonna sew a button on, okay? Over here, because my button is larger than their button, I am drawing their 2 dots so I can have that line, but my buttonhole will actually be longer. So making sure that this is still nice and perfectly straight, I'm drawing these 2 little dots. And I'm going to pull out my ruler, make sure that all 3 of these dots are pretty much in line, and they are. So for my buttonholer, what I need is a track to follow and a starting point, okay? And so my starting point is going to be this dot that's closest over here, and you can see I did not grade the front, and you can see where that little step down is. That's why we graded the collar, but you know, c'est la vie, c'est la vie. So if I am going to start it there, I'm also going to get my starting point marked here, which looks like about 3/4 of an inch in. So I'll just put a little crossbar there. So this is where my buttonhole is going to go. It's going to start here, and this is a 1 inch button. So I'll start at this point and just follow this track down, follow that track down. So let me go ahead and get my buttonholer set up. I usually use it on my 15. So I'm not too sure. I've never used it on Juliet before. Let me think about this for a minute. So I tried it, and I don't think that my 99 is going to fit the buttonholer that I like to use. I think I need to get a slightly different one. Or maybe it's just me. Maybe I just didn't do it right. But anyway, I am using my 15, and I made a sample just to see if I picked the right size. My button is exactly 1 inch. The size buttonhole cam I used is 1 1/16, because the next size smaller was actually slightly smaller than my button. So since it's a very thick button, I did the larger one. And I'm using black thread just because that's the color of the button, and why not? And I think that's going to work. So I'll show you how my buttonholer works once. I do have a separate video that goes more in depth on using a antique buttonholer. They are fabulous, but let me move you down to my 15. Okay, so here she is. Always love a good 15. They just keep going and going and going. So for my front here, I have my facing, here's a buttonhole here and here. I have my facing and everything pinned together in between them and on either side, just so that these pieces don't come separated. And again, this is the point where I'm going to be starting, right where that little T crosses. So making sure that my buttonholer is at the beginning of its track, and that looks pretty good to me. I'm going to be doing 2 circuits around it. If I lift this up a little bit, I can slide everything under. And let me slowly put my needle down so I can make sure it's in the right place. And it is. Okay, so now there's my track that I drew. There's a little line. There you go. There's a little line right here that I need to line up with that track. Put the whole thing down. And once it looks good, I'm going to go ahead and get her started. Okay, so that was 1 lap, and I'm going to make 2 laps just so I have definitely no danger of it ever coming unfrayed. Okay, and that's it. So I'll just move it over to the next one. I love these old buttonholers because they give you that nice ovaled edge instead of just a bar going back and forth, you know, that has a tendency to get sliced. It has that nice rounded oval. So very happy with these, love them to death. And let me do the other one exactly the same way, and then we'll be back at the table. Okay, so I got my 2 decorative buttons sewn on, and I'm just going to use my little buttonhole scissors to cut these open so that they will be ready to sew the buttons on the other side. And I'm not actually going to sew the buttons on the other side right now. I want them to lay pretty flat while I'm doing the next steps, but it'll be a whole lot easier just to sew a couple buttons on later than to have to do my buttonhole procedure later, you know what I mean? So I have these cut open. I'm just going to run my fingernail around in there to get any loose threads out so I can trim those off and they won't bother me later. So now that that is done, I can tell you back up here on this facing thing, this is very floppy. I am going to hand stitch the shoulder seams to the seam allowance of just the blouse up here on each side of the shoulders, just to kind of rein in some of that floppiness. I think if I can get these 2 positioned, then this will be a little bit better. And look, okay, so that's not a pucker, that's just, you know, thickness. But again, I think once I get this stitched here and this stitched here, I think that that will lay a lot flatter across my back. And if it still doesn't, I can come back with a needle and thread and just, you know, take a somewhat invisible stitch from the outside where I just catch a little bit of a thread and go all the way across. Okay, so it's been a bit, but I am back now, and I want to get you caught up on what I've been doing. The facing, I went ahead and stitched down all the way across the back between the shoulders. And one thing I don't think I mentioned is make sure that you clip your seam allowance around this collar, or else it'll be very hard to get it to lay nice and flat there for you. So with that done, I actually recorded this, but my microphone wasn't on, so, you know, you're gonna get it now. Okay, so it's kind of awkward here, but at the bottom of these front pieces, there are 2 notches down here. One here, match them up on top of each other, and then I stitched it together at about a 1/4 inch, you know, a 1/4 inch from my highest one. This facing, I'm probably gonna end up trimming that off at some point, but just sewing that there at 1/4 inch to hold it in place. I could go ahead and sew this button on now. So I got my bodice laid out here nice and flat. So I think that I can go ahead and mark where to sew on my other button. So let me grab these really quick. With the understanding that these buttons, they're the only strain they're going to be holding is basically my chest, because it's not going to be trying to pull open, because this is going to be sewed closed here with the waist. So usually I would place the button way over here on this side. Oh, these were donor buttons coming from some vintage garments at some point, and there they go. So usually if they are the only things holding the garment together, I try to place them way over here, and that way they're very secure, you know? With that is my understanding, and these do have a shank, so I can actually feel when they have come to the end of that buttonhole opening there. I am just gonna go ahead and make a little circle with my heat erasable pen. I almost tried to pick those up. And now I can fold this down, see where these go, and go ahead and sew them on. So I'm gonna do that really quick before we move on. Okay, so I have a skirt piece down here. Push you up. And here is my front bodice piece, and I'm just going to match the corners. And they don't tell you to stay stitch this. Usually on a circular type of a piece you would, but that's okay. I don't mind. I'm just going to basically match everything up here, and it looks like, I don't know. It looks like the skirt's a little bit larger than the front. I'm not too sure. I'm going to go ahead and figure out where the center back is, or the center of the skirt, match that up with the center, match up my notches, and if we need to ease something, we'll just ease it together. So I flipped it over to the skirt being on top because I think that'll make a little more sense. So matching up these notches is right here. I'm going to go ahead and pin it there. Got a lot of thickness going on right here, I can tell you that. Okay. And that's not bad. That is not bad at all. I'm just going to go ahead and match it up and sew it straight across at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, so I stitched it once, and I'm just opening it up to make sure everything looks good. So I think it does. What I'm going to do now is what the instructions say, which is basically, oops, look at me, I got a seam allowance turned. Oh well, you know, life will go on. But anyway, I need to make a second row of stitching, and they say a 1/4 inch in, so right about here, about halfway up the seam allowance, all the way across. And then they say to come back and trim near where the second row stitching is. I'm not too sure about that. I really am not too sure about that. Oh well. You know what? Second thought, while I'm looking at this, I am going to fix this, because having these seam allowances folded like that, I think will drive me crazy. So I'm just going to open these up, re-sew the seam right here, making sure that these are nice and open. Sometimes it doesn't bother me, but for this one, because there's so much thickness there, I think that having the seam allowances folded up like that is just going to add too much bulk to it. So fixing that first, and then coming back and doing a second row of stitches. Okay, so there's my 2 rows of stitching. So I am going to do what the instructions are saying and come back and trim close to the second row of stitching all the way across. And basically I'm going to do the same thing for the back. So I'm going to sew the skirt to the bodice back, 2 rows of stitching, and then trim close to the second row. Alright, so that is done now, and once I have them sewed together, went to the ironing board and pressed both of the seam allowances down, okay? So they are trimmed fairly close, which will make it easier when putting the zipper in, so that's good. So now they want you to put the zipper in on the left side, but I can tell you this, if you are left-handed, put it on the right side. You know, it'll be easier for you. It's an invisible zipper, so there's not really a lap or anything, so you do you. I'm right-handed, so I'm putting it on my left side, which is actually on the right side looking up at me, so there you go. Now on the pattern, there's a dot a couple inches down. That dot is the top point for my zipper. And here is my zipper, which I said before was a little bit longer than what they called for, but that's fine with me. And so, like always, the first thing I grab is my water-soluble double-sided basting tape. I love this stuff. It makes life so much easier for zippers. So, with the invisible zipper, and I am just thinking, do I even have a zipper foot I can use on her? I think I'm going to scrounge through. I think I do. But with an invisible zipper, I need to go over to my ironing board, uncurl this coil, and zip. And while it's unzipped, and iron it as flat as possible. That's going to make it a lot easier to sew near those coils without catching anything, okay? Don't re-zip it. Just leave it unzipped. Once you re-zip it, your coils curl back up on themselves, you know, and all is lost, and you have to start over again. So let me go iron my zipper, and I'll be right back. Okay, so my zipper is ironed here, and I can tell my dot's at 5/8 of an inch in. If I line up the edge of my zipper with that dot, I can see that the edge of my tape needs to be just a fraction inside of where my serging is, okay? If you don't have serging, I would measure your zipper, and like here I can tell my zipper is 3/8 of an inch. So that would mean I need 1/4 inch of my fabric showing, okay? Measure your zipper so you know, because this zipper is basically going to take the place of your seam, and so you want this to line up where 5/8 of an inch is. So all of that being said, let me pull the camera back out here. I'm just going to work on the front piece for right now. Get it smoothed down, make sure the seam allowance is pressed down. I'm going to put my zipper face down, little toggle down here, and match up this side here. Okay, let me move you up. See, way down here, it's upside down. And so this piece that is right here, the one that's going to be facing the fabric, that is where I want to put my tape. So I'm flipping it back over so I don't lose track of which is which, and it wants to flip again. Stop that. So I'm going to get my tape, and it's sticky, but it's got a paper backing, and I am just going to run it all the way from where the zipper stop is up here at the top, all the way down to the bottom of the zipper, and pull off the paper so I am left with a sticky surface. Okay, so now I can just pull the paper backing off my very long zipper. I think mine is 4 inches longer than what they call for, but that's okay. So I'm going to place it with the stopper of my zipper at the same level as my dot from the pattern here, and line up the edge of my tape just inside of where my serging is, because that's what's going to give me the placement I need. And just as I line it up, push it down so that tape will hold it in place. So now I need to go find an invisible zipper foot that will work on Juliet's low shank, and I'm going to need to sew it very close to where these coils are. There's kind of like a little guideline right there, if you could see it. That's where you're going to want to stitch all the way down close to these coils, because if you're too far away, your zipper's going to show, you know, which isn't the end of the world, but it kind of defeats the purpose of it being invisible. I found this little foot that I used on my 201 to put an invisible zipper on recently, and it should fit on 𝐥𝐢𝐤𝐤. So let me give it a shot. Okay, so while this is sewed on here, what I'm going to do, it's still upside down and I'm not zipping it. I'm just placing the other side next to it because there is a seam here, and I want to make sure that when I put the second half of my zipper on, that the seam is going to be lining up. So the front seam and the back seam will line up. So I'm just putting the pieces next to each other, making sure that the top stoppers are in the same place, the bottom is in the same place. Pull it fairly tight, and then where this seam line is here, I'm going to draw a straight line across there, okay? Can you see that? So that when I go to match this up on the back side, I can make sure that that line matches up with the seam line on the back. So, again, on the right side of my zipper, I'm just going to kind of flip it open here for a second. I need to put another row of my tape all the way down from the stop at the top, again on the front of the zipper, the side where this little zipper pull is here. Okay, from the stopper at the very top to down here. Now, when I sew on an invisible zipper, I don't go all the way to the bottom because, hey, I'm going to run into that thing and I can't get around it. But that's okay. My zipper is a little longer to start with, and it's fine. It actually makes it easier having this a little bit longer when I go to sew my bottom seam. So just to let you know, that is as far as I get. All right, so I've got my tape put on. I haven't pulled the paper off yet. So we already sewed it onto the front piece. So I'm just gonna lay my back piece here out, face up. And I'm gonna flip my front piece kind of on top of it, because that will make it fairly close, so when I stitch it, it will work. And now I can go ahead and peel the paper off of my tape so I can go ahead and just press it down. Okay, so I just pulled the paper off, so I have a sticky part right here. So the first thing I'm going to do is find that line that I drew where the seam is and place it, again, still just on the inside of my serging, so I'm at the right position here, but place this line on top of that seam, okay? Once that is in place, then I can work from that point down, matching up everything down here, and then from that point up. So hang on one second. Okay, so I have it pressed all the way down here, and let me work up here. There you go. So now I'm going to go ahead and stitch this side on, just the same as the other one, pretty close to the coils, right about here, all the way down until you can't, because there's going to come a point where you're going to run into this head and you just have to stop at that point. And for me, it was right there. Okay, I'm going to zip it up for the first time here, which is always a little bit stiff because the coils are a bit out of sorts. But, it all comes together here. Now this part here was a little bit thicker because of that seam, but you can see that it's matching up there perfectly, so that's really nice. I love that. And coming up, and that is as high as it goes right there. So yay, always successful. Now, at the bottom, I need to sew the rest of this seam closed. So what I'm going to do is fold it back in half, so I'm kind of looking at it this way here. And because we have a little bit of extra room here, I can just kind of fold this zipper up out of the way to match up the seam allowances here. And I'm just going to continue sewing at 5/8 of an inch, getting as close as I can to my stitching where I put my zipper in, okay? If I can't get right there, starting at about 1/4 inch below isn't going to be the end of the world. because we do have the zipper behind it, so you know, nothing will be showing. And then stitch the rest of the way down at 5/8 of an inch, and then after that press this seam allowance open. Okay, so I have my side seam here, got my zipper pressed down, and one of the good things about using this technique where you sew the side seam after you put the zipper in is you don't get this weird misaligned spot right here. It's really, really easy to get something slightly skewed, okay? And you can see down here, one side is about 1/4 inch or so off. And that was probably from something that was happening up in here. But if you sew this part ahead of time and then put your zipper in, that little bit that's different, and it happens all the time, don't feel bad, it happens all the time, but that little bit that's different, instead of just being something down here at the hem that you can just make disappear when you hem it, it ends up right here, and you end up with this weird lump, and it's just so annoying. So this is the only way I put them in, is put the zipper in first and then the seam. So up here at the top, there's a couple inches above the top of the zipper, and I'm just going to go ahead and unzip it a little bit here so I can get to it. So up here at the very top, I am going to just probably about 1 inch worth, because my zipper doesn't actually start until this point. I've just got tape up here, which is I made sure I put those inside of the 5/8 inch mark. But I'm going to stitch it a straight stitch from the top to where I can see my dot. You can still kind of see my dot right there, just to keep the top part closed, because we need that closed so we can put the sleeve in. Okay, so now this is closed at the top, so when I zip up my zipper, yes, I have my little pull on full display, but you know, that is life. So now the easy part is to do the other side. So the first thing I want to do is match up where this seam is, pin that together, and you know, with this matched first, then match up to the top, match to the bottom. Sew this whole seam at 5/8 of an inch and press the seam allowance open. Okay, so it is getting late. It is dark outside, so I'm going to call it a day, but I wanted you to take a look at her. She's looking pretty snazzy. I do like it. I do like it a lot, actually. I can tell you this one thing. I did not unbutton it when I went to pull it over my dress form. And typically it is a lot harder to pull something over my dress form than it is to pull it over my body, okay? So what that means is this button doesn't have to be functional. If you wanted to make your buttonhole and then just sew the button straight through so it is always closed, so you never have to worry about it coming open, you know, if you know that you have it the right size, you can probably get away with that. So here's the top of my zipper. It's way up here, you know, goes all the way down, very far. But for me, a longer side zipper makes it easier to get into. And that might be why, that's a thought, that might be why I was able to do this. So double check on yourself. Double check on yourself if you can, because I think that my zipper is 20 inches and the pattern called for 16 or something, so that might be the difference. I don't know. All I know is right now my lapels look great. It looks really nice on the back. It seems to be like a flattering design, so that's good. I'm going to call it a night. Tomorrow we will do the sleeves and hem it, and it will be done. See you then. Good morning. So I have 1 hour before I need to leave for an appointment, and I think that's just about enough time to get my sleeves made, hemmed, and maybe hem the bottom of the dress. I don't know. One thing is I wanted to point out, I have left the dress hanging on my dress form all night long because that skirt, the way that it's cut, there's a lot of bias going on. So you want to make sure that it has time to relax, you know, under gravitational force and everything, because there's a chance that it could stretch out in parts. So once I'm done with this, the very last thing I'm going to do is hem it, but I want to make sure that I hem it based on the actual distance from the ground, not just turning up a certain amount, because if it has stretched overnight, and I've had wovens just stretch like crazy overnight, I want to take that into account. So first thing is I want to go ahead and get my sleeve piece finished off around the edges. So I'm going to serge around the edges and mark my circles. There's a few circles to mark for the ease stitching, and say hi to Midna, and then we'll get started. Okay, so here is my piece, and I am going to, actually, you know what? I'm not going to mark this until after I've serged around the edges, because this is a curved top up here, and I want to make sure that sometimes when you serge around curves, it stretches a bit, and so I want to be able to iron it back down. Now I am clipping my notches, so I can tell what is front and what is back. Back always has more notches than the front. And I am clipping at the top center right here, because that's always a good thing to do. Okay, so I've got my sleeve looking like this, all serged and ironed and marked up. And now I'm going to run 2 rows of gathering stitches up here between these 2 dots. Well, I'm going to do 1 row just barely inside my serging, so at about 1/4 inch, and the next one at about 3/8 of an inch or thereabouts, just so that it's well hidden inside the seam allowance. Now that my gathering threads are in up here, I need to sew this seam here. So I'm going to go ahead and pin it together, sew it at 5/8 of an inch, and then press the seam allowances open. When I pulled my dress off of my dress form, I noticed that I forgot to finish up at the bottom of my zipper. So I could sew my zipper to a certain point, and I could start this seam down here to a certain point. But there is probably about 3/8 of an inch of space where there is no stitching. And it's not like you're going to be flashing anything, because there is a zipper behind there and all. But basically I'm going to come back with my needle and thread and try to invisibly stitch that little 1/2 inch. Sometimes I do it from the bottom, sometimes I do it from the top. It kind of depends on the fabric I'm using and the zipper that I use and the placement that I use and everything. But this time I'm going to be doing it from the top here, just to try to cinch it in so that it doesn't look incomplete, you know. Okay, so now that is what it looks like. I like that a lot better, so that when I tug down here, I got a piece of fuzz I need to pick off there. But so when I tug my zipper all the way down, it won't look like there's a little hole, because, you know, nobody likes that. Okay, so flipping my dress inside out, and I'm looking at one of my armholes here. Okay, so this is my front, this is my back. Turning my sleeve right side out, I want to make sure I'm getting the right sleeve for the right size. So this has 2 notches in this side, so that is the wrong one. So this should be the right sleeve. So again, turning this one right side out and laying it in the same way. Yes, this is the right one. So now that I know it's the right one, I can just lift it up, set it underneath, and I'm going to start pinning it, matching the bottom seam down here. And I'm going to pin it on both sides of the seam allowance so I can make sure that I keep these open. Then the next thing I need to do is match up my top, which should match up with the shoulder seam up here. I'm going to be pinning on, if I can get my fingers to work correctly here, on both sides of the seam allowance, just to make it behave. So now this is the back part, and we're going to match up notches to notches on the front, match those notch to notch, and then we'll see how much ease we need to pull those gathering threads for. Okay, so let me go ahead and just separate these. Pull my bobbin threads, which were on the right side when I sewed these on, and I'm just going to pull them until this is nice and flat like this, okay? Once I have that, I'm going to go ahead and pin it between this notch and the point where the gathering threads start. And again, down here where this seam is, I'm going to put another pin there to hold those seam allowances open, you know. So this is where all the gathering is going on the front. And I'm just going to spread it out a little bit. Kind of, I'm underneath here, but I want to try to smooth it enough that there's not a big pucker, you know. So if I turn it this way, I think you can see where I'm kind of putting my fingers to the inside to form like the sleeve cap. I'm not going to be setting the sleeve cap on my, a lot of times I set the sleeve cap ahead of time on my ironing board, gathering the stitches and forming it. I just didn't do it this morning because I was thinking, oh, I'm running short on time. And you know what's, a lot of times when I take shortcuts like this, it ends up taking extra time anyway. So you would think I would learn by this point, but anyway. All right, so there's this side. Let me go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and pin it up to the point where these gathering threads start on this side here, right there. This is the back part now. And pull my bobbin threads from my gathering stitches, which were on the right side. The bobbin threads pull easier than the needle threads. So I'm just going to pull these until I can get it nice and flat right here, and then work them in the same as on the front, just kind of adjusting and smoothing and moving and everything like that. What I want is at the 5/8 inch point, like right about here, for there to be no gathers, for all the gathers to be farther in. We'll see how it works. Okay, so now that I have it pinned, I'm going to go to my sewing machine and sew her on. So what I do, because I have a flatbed machine, not a free arm machine, you know, with a free arm you just pull it on and go. I pull it on like this, okay, and I start sewing right about here where one of the notches is. This is my bottom seam. So looking at, when I'm sewing, I am looking at the sleeve, okay? Up here I'm looking at the bodice, but that doesn't count. And I just kind of rotate it like this as I go. I want to look at the sleeve because I will be able to manage how this looks as I sew it. So I want to show you, I got one sewed in here, just my one row of stitching, and I was not able to make it totally pucker free. I've got a few little things up there, but you know what? I don't care. I think that it's not going to be a big deal, and no one's going to be, you know, pointing that out. I think that the silhouette will still be the same. I also don't know if I had left the sleeve as it was instead of expanding it out, if that would happen. I don't know. But I can tell you, if it's a choice between having a sleeve that's going to be comfortable around my arm or having a couple little puckers, I would rather have it comfortable around my arm. So yeah, I'm just going to let that be. What I need to do though is come back and do a second row of stitching. I don't know if the pattern calls for that. I don't think it does, but I'm going to. I'm going to do a second row of stitching from this bottom part here, basically the part that is not gathered, okay? Just about 1/8 of an inch in, all the way around like this, one more row. Okay, so I have my 2 rows of stitching here, and near the bottom, like between these 2 notches, I'm just going to come in with my pinking shears and trim off the very edge just to eliminate some bulk, make it more comfortable to wear. And so it looks like that when I'm all done, okay? I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. Okay, so This is the evening of the morning that I was sewing earlier. And I'm going to come down here on the floor because I want to go ahead and mark this hem. Now, I've had it on my dress form all day, and that's by design, so that all of this can settle where it wants to. So what I've done is I'm using my skirt marker here. Love these things. There is a little flappy part, okay? And the flappy part you pinch the fabric in, and there's like a little zigzag on the top with a tiny hole here. And what you do is you put a pin through that hole, and that marks exactly through the fabric a couple times. It's really nifty. So anyway, because it's been on here, I need to level out my skirt. And it's nice putting it on a dress form because it's kind of, you know, getting extra padding on my posterior side, so everything's hopefully shaped similar to what it'll be shaped like when I'm wearing it. So I have my skirt marker set at a measurement that is a little bit high. I'm going to lower it. What I want to do first is just even things out. So I want to get it to a point where I can mark everything around the bottom but not take too much off in the first go here. And I think this will about do it. So what I'm going to do is just pinch, stick a pin through. Well, that wasn't the best one. Hang on a second. Pinch it, stick my pin through. You can see it goes in and out and in and out. Go to the next spot, pinch it, stick my pin through, and then I'm just going to stay right here and slowly turn her around. And on the sides should be shorter than the front and back because this is where all the bias is. The sides are a lot straighter and more steady because they do have a seam line there. So anyway, I can see right now that on the sides, I may be taking off 1/2 inch. In the front and back, I might be taking off 2 inches. So it really does vary. So let me get all this marked, and then I'll take it back up to the table and show you how to level it off. Okay, so I've got it up here on my table, and pins marking the level point all the way around. So what I'm going to do is just trim following the line of the pins. Just going to get it started right here, trim towards this pin, pull it out, and then just continue on to the next one, pull it out, continue on all the way around, just going pin to pin to pin. I'm lifting it up so I don't cut through my bottom layer here. And then once I have all that trimmed, then hopefully my bottom edge will be level. Okay, so now that that is done, I needed to grab myself some seam binding. Yes, my package is ancient. It is from 1969, made in West Warren, Massachusetts. So anyway, seam binding, stretch lace is my preferred method for making hems on circular type skirts, where there's a curve to it. Oh look, how to make a head kerchief. How cute. Anyway, what I'm using is a pack of stretch lace, obviously. And if you've never seen it before, there is 2 tracks. There's usually a top and a bottom row. And those are the rows that I stitch in. And yes, it does stretch a little bit. It's not like elastic where you stretch it a lot. It stretches a little bit, but that little bit is enough to work in some ease so you can hem it up nicely. So what I am going to be doing is taking my stretch lace. So I'm going to be placing it about where the edge of my fabric is about halfway up the lace, you know, just about like that. And then at my machine, I'm going to sew it in this little channel right here, just a straight stitch. But as I'm sewing it, I'm just going to give it a little bit of a stretch, not like really hard, you know, because that would be too much. There's not that much curve in here, but just enough that it's slightly taut. And that way when I let it go, it's going to work in just a little bit of ease, okay? So I'm going to stitch a little bit, slightly taut, pull it, and then continue sewing up this little track right here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that all the way around the bottom edge. Okay, so I have it sewn on, and I'm looking at the wrong side here, but I just wanted to show you that now with that lace sewn on, when I fold it, it's just naturally going to want to curl together, and even though I have a curve, it'll lay nice and flat. Let me raise you up so you have a better view there, okay? So all I need to do is figure out how tall I want my hem to be. And I think that from the top edge of my lace, I want it to be 1 3/4 inches from this point to the bottom here. So I'm just going to pin it. And I am going to be machine stitching this hem. My thread blends very well, so I don't think that's a problem, but you can always, and I have before many times, gone ahead and just hand stitched the very top row in, just catching a little thread here and there so that it is practically invisible from the outside edge. I'm just going to machine stitch it. You know, Juliet is doing a fabulous job right now. So I'm just going to turn up at specific points. Let me get a different ruler here. Move my little slider to 1 3/4 inches. I'm just going to pin it, you know, every now and then go over to my ironing board and press it so I have that nice crease, and then I can go to my machine and stitch her right across the top edge. Okay, so here is my hem from the outside. That line of stitching will pretty much disappear. And on the inside, I hope you can see I have a row of stitching up here. And then this is the one down below. Works like a charm. Do love my stretch lace. The only thing I still have to do is the hem on the sleeves. So basically, it's going to be a very simple hem because it's just nice and straight here. So, sorry about that. So what I'm going to do is just turn under the edge, and you know, one of my sleeves was slightly longer than the other, all of my alterations and such, but I can bend it over right here to even everything out. And then I'm going to go ahead and press it like that, and then come back and fold it up one more time at about a 1 inch, 3/4 to 1 inch hem. And then I will also just straight stitch that. So it is done here, and I think it's cute. Now I, of course, put it together in a totally different order than what the instructions say, but in general, you know, we went along with their plan, just different order. I'm really, really glad I made these sleeves as wide as I did. Now it fits, I think, with the amount of ease that you can kind of see on the drawing of the model on the front of the envelope. I think that that's important. And also, I think, my opinion, this is a great dress for not much fabric. It only takes 3 yards of a 45-inch wide fabric to make this, which is not a lot for a complete dress. So I like that too. I think that it is, you know, It's not really bulky. It's flattering. It's pretty easy to put on. Now I do have a zipper that's 4 inches longer. So my zipper comes down to here, whereas their zipper would be like to here, more at low hip level. So, you know, if you want to get in easy, well, maybe put a longer zipper in. But it's chilly out here. I'm getting goosebumps and everything, but I wanted to show you what it looks like. I like it. I think it's very comfortable. I think it's a good everyday kind of dress, and I think if you did the 3/4 length version, you know, out of a really nice fabric with some really snazzy buttons, it could be very royal. You know what I mean. So anyway, I hope you like it, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Living my bucolic life, free up the city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn, then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses, the view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.